All right. Good afternoon. At least it's good afternoon for me and Sam. Good morning, good evening, depending wherever you are in the world joining us from. And welcome to another Believe in Serverless live stream. Super excited for today's session with Sam. But before we just get into that, tomorrow we have another session. We have a session from Sandro from Hashnode talking about Hashnode's journey into its public GraphQL API. Now, I am not a GraphQL person, so I personally am super excited for that one. So if you want to join us tomorrow, that's 11 o'clock BST, whatever that converts to in your local time zone. It'll all be on the calendar, on the Discord, on the socials. But for today, as I said, I'm super excited to be joined by Sam Locke, talking to us about the IAM Policy Simulator. Welcome to the live stream, Sam.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I'm excited to show what this policy can do, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. This is something I've never used before. I normally just like kind of flail around in the dark when I'm doing anything with IAM. So I'm super excited to see this. So I will bring your screen up now. And yeah, let's get started.
Perfect. All right, James. So this is about a 30-minute long, sort of a short sort of lightning talk. The IAM Policy Simulator, we don't need to go too deep into it. Oh, James, we've just lost my screen if you want to bring it up. Perfect. Great. Oh, do you want to bring, there we go. Perfect. So let me sort of set the scene for what I'm about to show you. I'm going to show you a quick 2-minute video, and this is from one of the Believe in Serverless Friday night streams about a month or two ago with Alan and Andres. So they were building an application using App Runner, which is sort of just a nice heavy guardrails, throw a container and spin up an API or a worker service. They were using it to pull down the video streams from Believe in Serverless, and they wanted to use generative AI to try and create a short form media, pick out the most exciting bits. And so the first thing they needed to do was need to pull the video down, extract the text, extract the audio, and then convert that to text using the Amazon Transcribe service. And I was watching this stream live, and what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to sort of show you in real time an IAM issue that they ran into. And then I'm going to show you why they should have used the IAM Policy Simulator to save them about 10 minutes worth of debug time. So, James, if you want to just go full screen, and I'll play this, and I will be back in a couple of minutes.
I'm gonna bring your screen back up. Here comes your screen.
Access denied.
Access denied.
Okay. We don't have start transcription job.
We don't have start transcription job. Okay. So we need to add, this is the role that App Runner is executing under. So this is its full range of permissions. You can see right now we have get object, put object from the clip finder bucket, and then we have these. So it looks like I just called
create. You would need to start transcription job.
This is what I get for using Amazon Q, man. Okay, so that's oh cool, already deployed. Nice. Let's try it again. So upload that to S3, and then hopefully this will kickstart that transcription job. So Andres, while that's going, let's talk about the next phase here.
It's already going on.
It's already going. Failed. What did it fail with?
Our role. Start transcription job.
Could be worse.
Yeah. Let's see. I wish it auto. Oh. It's not authorized still.
Oh, okay. That's unfortunate because that means that all of this was just me making a typo on the policy. That's annoying.
What did you?
I would really like to blame you for this one, but I'll blame myself. So looking at this, we gave it permissions to this specific resource.
Oh, /star.
Yeah, we needed to give it to all of that. Super okay. So Sam said something that I don't even know how to start with that. You can use the IAM Policy Simulator to fix the role and test it before deploying it. Sam, I'm going to put a pin in this one and get you on this stream with Andres and I, and you can walk us through that when we're building something and you can educate us all on the policy simulator.
All right. So, and here we are, educating the Believe in Service community on the IAM Policy Simulator. James, if you want to bring that video down, go full screen. Perfect. Okay. So let me just sort of summarize there. And so that was obviously a condensed version of the stream. And it was actually, how much was it? That was almost an hour worth of stream time that obviously condensed down. And in that hour, they still hadn't figured out their IAM problem. They, of course, went around and did some other bits, but they always just made an inline change in their code and just sort of expected it to work. And their feedback loop is extremely slow in this example here. If you remember what I told you they're doing with the app runner, they're pulling down an hour-long streaming video from S3, and then they're pulling out the audio and trying to transcribe it. And during all that fast forward section, that app runner server, that worker, was running for a couple of minutes, downloading that object from S3 every time. So their feedback loop to whether their IAM role had been fixed was at a minimum 2 minutes. And so for people listening on the call, I'm sure that you've probably had a similar situation. I know that I have, deploying standard web applications on EC2 and RDS back in the past. RDS taking about 15 minutes to actually spin up. So that feedback loop for me was extremely slow, just to find out that maybe I hadn't given the permissions to pull down the RDS credentials from Secrets Manager or something like that. And that's where I stumbled upon the IAM Policy Simulator. So before we dig into it, let me just break down what their approach was. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to solve that in a matter of seconds for them. I know it's kind of cheating because I've managed to prepare this and I have hindsight on my side. But anyway, what happened? They created an inline IAM policy using Amazon Q. Nothing wrong with using generative AI, especially for live streams and demos, but it does like to hallucinate and it's never going to get things right. They tried, they waited 2 minutes and it failed. They noticed that they needed access to the start transcription job within transcribe. And they could see from their list that they had, I think they had list and they had create. By the way, create transcription job isn't even an action. That was a full-on hallucination by Amazon Q. So they added the start transcription job. They hadn't got the resource part of their IAM policy right. So it still wasn't going to work. So they ran it again, waited 2 minutes and it failed. At that point, they were fairly sure that they'd got things right. And they thought that maybe App Runner was still using the older version of the IAM role because they'd just done a quick deploy and then tried to give the service a job again. So they ran it a second time. And again, after doing a full-on redeployment, and it still didn't work. So now they knew that the IAM role was still in the right state. It was still wrong. So then they looked through it and saw that they'd simply missed the /* for the resource ARM, and then they were working. And it took them 4 attempts. And so 4 attempts, taking about 2 minutes of feedback and then a couple of minutes to figure out what's going on. There was at least 10 minutes of engineering time that they lost. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring up my screen and I'm going to show you the IAM Policy Simulator. So, all right. So let me just pull up my screen. So window, let's go with this. All right, James, you're going to pull that up. Perfect. All right. Let me show you how to get here, first of all. So there's a reason that not many of us know about the IAM Policy Simulator because its SEO is absolutely terrible. If you were to simply Google the IAM Policy Simulator, you don't get the simulator itself at the top of the list. You actually get its documentation. I also don't know if you can get there from the AWS console itself. So I always go through it using this technique. So you can go through to the documentation. And then we have a link to the policy simulator here at the top. So let's just go through the quick user interface, and then we're going to go through a couple of examples for the rest of the lightning talk. So I've previously signed in with an IAM entity, and you can see here on the left-hand side that I have access to all the users, IAM users, IAM groups, and IAM roles within my account. This is a fresh account that I created for this demo, so there's not really a lot going on in here. On the right-hand side, you can actually now simulate sort of an IAM or an AWS action. So we've got things like getting an object from S3 or DynamoDB put item. On the right-hand side here is where you're going to craft the action that you want to do. So let's actually go through the example that we saw in that previous demo by Alan and Andres. So I've created an IAM role here. So Andres and Alan's app runner role. So this is the role that they were using for their app runner instance. And they created an inline policy. And you can click here and we can read everything to do with their IAM roles. So you can see here that they were allowing a let me zoom that in a little bit. Let's go a bit bigger. There we go. So they had transcribe, get transcription jobs, list transcription jobs, and they had create transcription job. And again, remember, that's a full-on hallucination, create transcription job. It does not exist. And they'd fully wildcarded their resources. So now let's try and simulate what went wrong. And the good news is when you get an error in App Runner or wherever, you normally get a very verbose sort of paragraph back from the API, for those of you that have worked with it, saying that you were trying to access this X resource where they give you the ARN, and this is the action you were trying to do. And so what you can then do from that is you can sort of reverse engineer and transcribe. Let me just scroll down and find it. So transcribe. Here we go. So we pick our service, Amazon Transcribe, and then you go here to the actions. And these are all the AWS actions that belong to that service. So the error messages that they had told them that they were unauthorized to do a start transcription job. So you can see that's down here. So we click that and we can accept. So there's some global settings. We won't really go through that now. That's to do with lots of the condition keys within an IAM policy. You see here, this is a very special AWS action whereby apparently you don't need to specify a specific resource. You actually are forced to use the wildcard, supposedly. So what we can now do, it's prepared us with an asterisk, a full wildcard, and we can, on the top right here, we can use run simulation. We run that here and we can see that it tells us that we are denied. Our role is not able to do this action. And it even gives you a little bit of a reason as to why. So what we can now do with that information, rather than going and making that change all the way in App Runner, redeploying App Runner, running the job, which took 2 minutes to pull down a huge object from S3, we can actually make some changes here in the left-hand side. And we sort of create this is a complete sandbox. This AWS account, I'm going to show you in a second what this IAM user can do, and it can do next to nothing. So making changes here is not going to change any of your IAM roles or policies. But what we can do is we can add another action. Maybe let's put transcribe in there just to start with. But we want to start a transcription job instead of create. Start. We hit apply down here in the bottom left. And now we can run simulation again. And we now see that we're allowed. So what you can now do is you can take this, go back to your code and apply it to your code. And you should now have a little bit more certainty that that AWS action is going to be authorized. And so when I was commenting on their stream, this is exactly what I wish that they would have done, rather than wait 10 minutes. Simply pull the role. You don't need to pull the role. You just go straight to the IAM Policy Simulator when you're already logged in. Find the role for your app runner, craft your AWS action that you want to do. They even had the actual ARN of the job itself. Everything was there. Then you can make your changes on the left-hand side, try and get it to get into an allowed state, and then you can backport that to your code. So that's one example. Let's go through a few more that I've prepared. I will say now that one of them wasn't behaving particularly well when I was trying to prepare this just about an hour ago. So it's something on the Amazon side. So we'll see whether things work a bit better here. So I've got an IAM user that I've prepared here, and this IAM user has one policy. And so actually, it doesn't even have the policy. Let's ignore the policy for now. Now, let's go back to the documentation. And I just want to walk through the documentation a little bit because it's very important, this page. It has a lot of caveats, but it also tells you how you can get this set up for your AWS ecosystem. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the actual AWS actions that need to be granted to your IAM entity that you're using. And so this is exactly what I've got here for this live demo. So you can see here, we've basically got a lot of reads access to IAM. If you try and use this policy simulator at work or something, and I've had this with a few clients, it won't load for me. I get lots of errors. And it's mostly because you haven't been granted the read access to IAM, especially in production, because it increases your area of attack. If somebody's able to see all of your IAM policies and your IAM roles, and is able to figure out a way around all of the protection that you put in place. So you have to ensure that you've got some of these, they are harmless, just read actions. Similarly for groups, and then similarly for roles and policies themselves. So that's the first thing you need. And that's obviously so that it can populate this list on the left-hand side. I see all my users. I see all my roles. Even if I go onto a user, I see the actual policies that it's got. I even see some resource-based policies. If I go to this example user here that I've created, nope, not this one. Okay, maybe it's not there. So that's the first thing you need. Now, the IAM Policy Simulator also supports resource-based policies, which is something I'm going to try and show you, but the demo wasn't behaving particularly well. And so specifically, we're going to be looking at S3. It covers S3 very well. So again, the IAM Policy Simulator, it needs access to retrieve your S3 bucket policies so that it knows when making this calculation as to whether or not it's authorized, whether you can do said action. Now, the final thing that you need, zoom in a little bit more here, is to actually do the simulations themselves. And so there is an API for this. I'm going to show you a little bit more about how we use that soon. But there's two ways that you can use the API. You can use sort of custom policies here. So I'm specifically looking at what I've highlighted here. So the IAM simulate custom policy. That is used if you want to sort of craft a policy in the front-end application, but also if you make any changes. So remember what we did on that role for Andres and Alan's example? We went in here and we added this start transcription job. Now that's not going to be applied to IAM. The account's not aware of this. This is a sandbox. So what the simulator does is, rather than using this API action, which is the simulator, a real principles policy where you just provide the policies ARN or the role ARN, we're going to simulate a custom policy because I've created a custom policy. I've branched from a real policy and I've created a custom one. So those are the two ways that you can actually use the API, and it's the two ways that the application itself uses the API. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you, how to grant access. Main key takeaway from this, if you don't have access, it could be because there are some very scary looking IAM reads policies that you need access to. There is also, this is technically an IAM write policy. We are doing a simulation and it's under the IAM service. So again, a very scary action to allow within maybe a larger enterprise, but everything's here. My example here, I can even show you it now. If I go back to my user that I've logged in as, which is this simulator user, I just created this policy. We've just got a lot of IAM gets and lists. And then I've got the IAM simulate custom policy and simulate principal policy on a wildcard of resources. That's all I've got, and the simulator works fine. So now let's talk about some of the caveats of the IAM policy simulator. It's not going to be perfect. So there's a few things you need to be aware of. And luckily, they're all here on this documentation page. There's a very important page, not only because it's got the URL, but it's also got everything that it can't do. Because IAM is very complicated, especially when you're thinking multi-account and whatnot. So there are a lot of things here I can explain why they're not supported. But there's a lot here that I simply can't explain. I don't know enough about them. And maybe it's in the inner workings of the policy simulator itself. So as we scroll down here, we can see one saying that simulation of resource-based policies isn't supported for IAM roles. So if you have an IAM role and you're using a resource-based access policy for an S3 bucket or for a new, the new feature for DynamoDB, supposedly it's not going to be able to take that into account when giving you that that pass or that fail in the simulator. So that's the first thing. Now it does support that for users, and I'm going to try and show you, but it wasn't behaving particularly well for me earlier. A second limitation that I can't really explain is that it doesn't evaluate SCPs. So SCPs are the filters that you apply at the account level if you're using AWS organizations. So you can say that no IAM user or any entity within your account can do X, Y, Z actions. A good example is retrieving secrets from Secrets Manager. Even if you've got admin access, you're not allowed to do that. Now, you can add conditions to an SCP. It uses the same syntax as an IAM policy. But for some reason, the policy simulator will not evaluate those conditions. And it's only specifically for SCPs. It does work for standard IAM policies. Very strange. Can't really explain this. Third one, so the policy simulator doesn't simulate tags provided as input if the identity-based policy doesn't have a condition in the policy itself. So let me try and convert that into English. If you don't have a condition key in any of your IAM policies, so if we go back to the simulator, let's come here to when you select your policy here from maybe like a user or a role that's got quite a few policies. So this is a good point to mention that you can isolate down to particular policies when doing your evaluation, or you can just select all the policies under a role. Maybe they all need to work together to grant the access. We obviously have these effects, action, and then resource, and sometimes you can have a condition key. Now, if you don't have a condition key in any of your policies that are being assessed, it will simply bypass all check for simulating tags and whatnot. So again, that kind of makes a bit of sense, I guess. Other than that, I think that's the biggies. Yeah, so that's the biggies. There's one there that isn't really documented, but I'm going to show you some examples now using S3. So what I'm going to do, I've got two S3 buckets set up. So let's do this right in. So I've got an S3 bucket set up in my account, and I've got an S3 bucket set up in a second account. So here, I'm just going to try and list all of the objects within my S3 buckets within my account. So this is the IAM simulator, same account. That's the bucket name. And you can see here that I just put an image of myself in this bucket. So nice and simple. Great. So if we now go to the IAM Policy Simulator, so I now know in real life that I can do this action. Let me just pull up my details. Great. Now let's craft that action that I've just sort of done in real life. So I've used the simulator role S3 buckets user, and so let's clear all of this. So let's now go to S3. I'm going to select an action. And this sometimes takes a while to load. There we go. So I was trying to do list objects. I'm just going to do list objects. Let me just use Control F for list objects. Okay, I'm just going to use get object instead. It's all the same. So here we're doing an S3 get object, and now we can provide the ARN. So luckily, I prepared the ARN of my S3 bucket before the talk started, and as Andres and Alan will know from what we just saw, you want to make sure that you add your slash and then your asterisk if you want to include all sort of child objects within the S3 bucket. So this is where the demo did break down. So I'm expecting this not to work, but that's okay. We're going to try. Okay, so there's some kind of server-side error. Let's now just kind of pretend that worked. Now what I'm going to show you is some cross-account S3 bucket access. So here I've got a S3 bucket now called the IAM Simulator cross-account bucket. And so I've granted myself access. I'll explain how in a moment. And you can see here that I did an LS. I haven't put anything in the bucket, but we didn't get a failure. If I put something like this in, I'm going to get some kind of, there we go. So I can list objects from that IAM sim cross account bucket. Let me show you very quickly how I did that in a second account. I've created a bucket policy. I did create a bucket policy. Oh, I'm in the wrong buckets. Hold on a second. Too many buckets. There we go. Okay, so I created a resource-based access policy on my S3 bucket in a second account. I explicitly granted that to the principal, being the user that I just used, and allowed it to list the buckets, so list all the objects and get individual objects here. So that's how I did it. Now, let's try and replicate this in the IAM Policy Simulator. Bear with me. Okay, so everything's pretty much the same. I use the same role. I'm doing the same action, but I'm now just going to change the ARN to be, instead of being same account, it now says cross accounts. Really hoping that this works, but I doubt it will. It won't. Okay, which is fine, but I want to get explained. Oh, okay, denied. Great. Okay, perfect. So this now says denied. Now I'm using the, there we go. Allowed. Perfect. Okay. So great, this works. Excellent. So I, as well as having the resource-based access policy in my second account, for this actual IAM entity that I'm using, you also need to grant access in your account. So I need to grant it access to get objects and list buckets from this cross-account bucket, even though it's not in my account, because the validation sort of happens on two sides. Within your account, you need to know whether your IAM role or user has access to do the get object or list bucket action. Now, if that bucket's in another account, there needs to be a validation on that side to ensure that the bucket also grants that access. Otherwise, I could change this bucket name to anything and just access buckets from other accounts. So that's why there's validation on both sides. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the bucket policy from my cross account, my second account buckets. So I'm just going to remove all of this and hit save. So I've got nothing. Great. Now let's bring up my terminal and try and list all the objects from that bucket. And what's going to happen is it's going to fail because I've still got I've granted my permissions within my own account, but I've now revoked those permissions in the second account because I've removed that resource-based access policy. Now, here's where the problem breaks down. I'm not going to change anything here. I'm now going to hit my run simulation. I know that this action isn't allowed anymore. And for those that can't tell, I'm spamming my button. I'm hitting run simulation and it's saying allowed. And that's because this IAM Policy Simulator is a sandbox within my own account. So it'll assess my own IAM policies and IAM configuration. So it assesses this policy. It says that I'm allowed to get objects and list buckets from these random S3 buckets. However, it has no idea. It has no context as to where these buckets are. It doesn't know that they're in a second account. And it obviously does not have access to the resource-based access policies in somebody else's account. So this is another bit where the IAM Policy Simulator can break down. And that covers most of what we've got. James, I hope it's okay. I'm going to show a very quick code demo. It should take a couple of minutes. I hope that's all right.
Yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Perfect. All right. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you. Let me summarize what we've looked at. I've shown you how we get to the IAM Policy Simulator through the documentation. I've shown you the IAM policies that you must be granted. So it's mostly IAM reads and then those two IAM writes, which are to do the policy simulation for a custom policy or for a principal policy. I showed you a few ways in which the IAM Policy Simulator can break down, especially if you're doing cross-account access. It'll only validate your side of that agreement. It cannot analyze the other side because we're inside the sandbox. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of code, and we're just going to go a little bit beyond sort of just using the IAM Policy Simulator and sort of speculate about how you can use this in sort of your day-to-day engineering lives. So let me bring some code here. Should only take a second. So I created a CDK project here, and it doesn't really do a lot. I didn't even check if it worked. It was a Lambda function behind API gateway with S3. As part of the API payload, you pass an object name, and it checks whether that object just exists in S3, and just returns a Boolean true or false. I just needed a very simple API, because we're not going to be using the API. We're focusing on the IAM here. And so as part of the CDK code, there's this very nice grant reads, where we grant read access from our S3 bucket to our Lambda function. And so I'm not too sure whether it's a resource-based policy or an IAM policy, but it's not too important here. I've deployed this and it's live, and I've written a test. I'm trying to think how we can use the IAM Policy Simulator as part of our software development lifecycle. Specifically, checking and enforcing that our IAM configuration is right. So what I just showed you is great as a reactive tool to use maybe when you're on a stream, like Alan and Andres were, to very quickly debug and get your IAM policy right. But maybe we want to ensure that our IAM policies are right earlier in our development lifecycle. And this could be where we use some kind of test. So I created a test, or ChatGPT created a test for me, but it works fine. And you can see here that as part of this unit test, I've just written it as a unit test, we're going to be calling the simulate. Let me zoom this in. We're going to simulate the simulate principal policy commands. So remember, I showed you there were two API actions. They'll simulate custom policy and simulate principal policy. So here I've just run the test, and it's going to check whether the evaluated decision is allowed. So it's either allowed or denied. That's basically that string that we saw in the front-end application. So I'm going to run my unit tests, and hopefully it's going to work. And it passed. So that's great. So I now know that my live IAM role for my Lambda function, or my Lambda function's role, is allowed to do S3 get objects on the bucket that I deployed. I just hard coded everything nice and easy. So that's great. So I know that my application is now going to work, and I've got a test for that. Just to show you how good the test is, maybe we can remove this grant read access. Let's comment this out. Do a CDK deploy, I believe it is. And all this is going to do is it's going to revoke that read access. So it should only take a moment. And so whilst we're waiting for that, let me talk about why exactly it is that I used the principal policy command and not the custom policy command. So CDK and serverless framework, AWS IAM, they all have one thing in common, that they generate CloudFormation. And that CloudFormation is dynamic. It uses variables and the intrinsic functions like sub and whatnot. Now, the custom policy command, if we were to replace principal here with custom, that would work very well before we've deployed our code. But the problem is we don't have the full syntax for that policy. Maybe we're subbing in the region in an ARN, for example, or the bucket name. I'm going to show you an example for that in a second. In the meantime, we've done our changes. I'm going to now do an npm test, and hopefully it's going to fail. It fails. So we now know that our Lambda function has lost access to the S3 bucket. So this is a very powerful test that we can put in our lifecycle somewhere to ensure that all of our applications have got access to the AWS actions that they're designed to have. Now, where can we run this? This is what I was alluding to before. We had to deploy the IAM role first before I could run the tests, because I'm using the principal policy command. Let me show you now here in the CDK output why I can't use the custom policy. Some of you who are listening may think, well, you can pull the role from the generated CDK. You can do a CDK synth instead of deploy. I can pull down my role here that you see, and then I can run the API. And you're right, I can do that. Let's just look at what actually gets generated. So this is our IAM role. This is CloudFormation now, though, for those that aren't aware. And you can see here, when we look at some of the managed policy ARNs, we're doing an intrinsic join in CloudFormation to join the ARN with the partition, for example. So this needs to be a string. This whole bit here, CloudFormation, will turn it into a string before it deploys. But what we've got locally here is not a string. It's something that's ready for an intrinsic function. So we can't use the custom policy simulator. So where do I think we can use this? Those of you that follow Yang Shui's content, and who doesn't, let's be honest, he talks a lot about what's called remote call testing. So remote call testing is it's a mixture of local testing and remote testing. It's using those remote resources. It's using real resources in AWS. And I think this is where that pattern works. If you're able to use ephemeral environments as part of your CI/CD, you can deploy the entire environment. Then you can run a test like this that's going to check whether that real IAM policy. So here, look, the policy ARN. So this is going to my role that I just deployed. So it's checking whether this whole ARN, this whole IAM role, whether it has access to S3 get object on this very real bucket and object. So as long as all that's been deployed, you can run the test, validate everything works, and then you can tear it down. What you don't want to do is be running it on a real live environment, because you would have deployed to the environment before you run the test. And if it comes back as a fail, well, then what do you do? It's already been deployed. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to say. Let's sort of recap, James. If you want to just pull the screen down, just have my face, that'd be great. Perfect. Let's sort of cover everything that we've gone through. So we went through the policy simulator front-end application. I showed you how we get there, how you can grant your own permissions to that. In larger organizations, it can be a little bit more complex. I showed you how it can do things very well. I showed you how things like resource-based access policies from a cross account aren't going to work. I showed you there are a few things in the documentation. For some reason, SCPs, resource-based access policies cannot be used for IAM roles for some reason. So it has a few fallbacks, but for the majority of situations, it's a great tool to bring in a live role that you can't get working in the real world, make those changes on the left-hand side, constantly test it with a sub-second feedback loop. Once you get it right, backport it to your code, and everything should work. After that, I sort of postulated how you can then use the API to do a bit more proactive preparation of your IAM roles. Rather than reacting to something not working, be a bit more proactive, test-driven development. Create that IAM test, and so your code will not deploy to an upper environment until it passes that test. That's something else you could do. So that pretty much covers it, James. Thanks for listening, everyone that's here.
Awesome. That was super cool. Super cool. I started writing down questions, and you basically answered every question that I had previously. I'm really glad you went into that code stuff right at the end, actually, because that was kind of seeing that you can actually write tests to use this kind of stuff. Like in the past, I'd have ran a proper integration test, waited for the integration test to fail, gone to check my logs, work out why the test has failed. Whereas to actually be able to test against IAM is super cool. Are all the services supported, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yeah. What it's using is there's an AWS API that will list all of the AWS actions that are available. So the point at which the action is available on that live API, which is basically when it's implemented in IAM, it will just be there. And then all it's doing is it's just taking JSON, and it's got some built-in logic within its API just to figure out whether you've got an allow action with an allow key with a particular action for a particular resource. It's very simple what it does, to be honest.
Very, very cool though. Simple but cool.
Yeah.
Juan was particularly appreciative of the fact you were using Transcribe, because he's using Transcribe a lot as well. Before we do close off though, we do have a special guest joining us. Seeing as you talked about him a lot. Hello,
Alan. Sam.
Hello, Alan. I hope I wasn't bashing you too much. It was all in good spirit.
When we were talking about getting you on this stream, it's a good thing that you didn't tell me you were going to be slandering me the whole time, because I would not have set this up. I'm not very used to being the guy that's like, here's what not to do. Don't do what Alan does. It's actually a really good Really good flow though, showing the video of me struggling for like literally an hour, and then showing how we could have done that faster in like 2 minutes. Super useful.
Alan, the only reason I know about it is I've done it about 10 times in the past and taken about 10 times as long as you guys did. So I can't stress it enough. No one is alone on this. Everyone hates IAM for this exact reason. There's no visibility.
I think we've all
into
been
it.
there. I think anyone who's worked with AWS for any amount of time has spent at least an hour trying to fix IAM issues. So this is definitely something I'm going to use in the future. Yeah, super cool. Thanks, Sam. Rohan's sending his love from India. So we've got a global audience as always, which is very cool. Alan, thanks for jumping on quickly. I figured you might want to defend yourself. Sam, thank you very much again for going through this. Again, super cool. For anyone else watching, remember at 11 o'clock BST tomorrow, which is that about 7 a.m. US time-ish, Alan, I guess?
Yep.
Ish?
Yeah, 7 a.m. Well, this is the same time as we ran this one today, right?
I think it's earlier. I think it's 2 hours earlier.
2 hours earlier?
Yeah.
Well, this one started at 7 a.m. for me. Here.
Okay. So it's early. If you're in the US, we'll say that. It's 11 a.m. BST tomorrow. We've got Sandro from Hashnode talking about all things GraphQL, which is going to be very cool. So thanks everyone for checking in. Sam, thank you again. And we will see you all tomorrow.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Glad to be here.